Cloud. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Come on in. Give people a chance to get in here, and then we'll get started in just a minute.
I think there's a couple of seats left down front.
All right. Spotlight my video here. Okay, well, we still have a couple people. Let's see, I think we've got everybody in off the waiting room now, so I think we're ready to get going here. So good afternoon and welcome everyone to the first Friday lecture for the month of December. Today's speaker is Kendall Sharp, and his title is Starting with Tragedy, Why the Basic Program Begins with Ancient Greek Drama and Philosophy. This first Friday lecture is supported by the Anastoplo Lecture Series Fund in memory of Basic Program instructor George Anastoplo. Please note that this presentation is also being recorded, and it will be available on the Graham School YouTube channel if you want to watch it later. Also, please be aware that you will not be able to unmute your microphones during this presentation as a courtesy to our speaker. You will be able to ask questions in the chat box. You can do so at any time during the presentation. And questions that you type in the chat box, I'll keep track of, and then I will pose them to Kendall at the end of the lecture during our question and answer period. During the presentation itself, as I say, all will be muted except for our speaker. Kendall and I will be able to see your video, but won't be able to hear you. So if you choose to leave your video on or turn it off, it is at your discretion. Kendall's video will be spotlighted for the most part during the presentation. Consequently, the best way to view the lecture is to select speaker view instead of gallery view. Today's lecture is being sponsored by the Basic Program of Liberal Education for Adults at the University of Chicago's Graham School. And my name is Zoe Eisenman, and I'm the Director of Academics at the Graham School. Before I properly introduce our speaker, I'd like to say a few words about the basic program, the Graham School, and our upcoming courses and events. And I'll be putting some of these things in the links to these events and information in the chat box. Let's see. Okay. The basic program is a 4-year non-credit certificate program at the University of Chicago's Graham School of Continuing Studies. And the Graham School offers an array of programs besides the basic program. Let me put some of this in the chat here. You can see some of those there in the slide. Since 1946, we have offered our students a rigorous liberal arts curriculum based on the principle of direct engagement with original thinkers in their original texts. Through focused discussion and close reading, our classes provide direct encounters with some of the great works of classical and Western culture in a dedicated community of adult learners led by experienced University of Chicago educated instructors. Registration for winter 2024 courses is now open on our website. Let's see, and I think, yeah, I put that in there. Registration is also now open for the spring break in Greece and the fortnight in Oxford's travel study programs for 2024. Let me put these links in the chat also so you guys can have them. And there's going to be a information session for the Oxford program coming up. So you can see the links for those in the chat as well. And we encourage you to join us on one of these trips. Should be very exciting. Our next First Friday lecture will happen on January 5th. Let me see there. There we go, where our speaker will be basic program instructor Julia Muller. Her title will be Avast, Moby Dick and the Scales of Natural History. As I mentioned before, this presentation is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the Graham School YouTube channel early next week. There's a link to the YouTube channel. Now I'd like to introduce our lecturer for today. Kendall Sharp. Kendall Sharp is completing his second term as Cyril O'Hoole Chair of the Basic Program of Liberal Education for Adults. He holds a PhD from the Committee on Social Thought and a BA from the college at the University of Chicago. Formerly, he was assistant professor in the Department of Classical Studies at the University of Western Ontario, and he has taught also at DePaul University in history, the University of Illinois Chicago in classics, and the college in the humanities. He rejoined the basic program in 2019, having last served on the staff in 1999 to 2000. His research and publishing focus on Plato's dialogues as literary expressions of the philosophical life. His teaching has included Greek and Latin languages, classics in translation, literature, philosophy, history, and both classical mythology and ancient Greek science. Now it is my pleasure to turn things over to Kendall.
Thank you, Zoe. And I will share my screen as soon as your screen goes away.
Okay, here you go.
Okay, let's see here. I want to continue. Okay, here we go. Starting with tragedy, why the basic program begins with ancient Greek drama and philosophy. For this lecture, I imagine myself replying to the several prospective students whom I meet at information sessions, where they come to learn about the program and I persuade them to sign up. After I show them the curriculum for year one, one question about the readings has a real point to it. Why does the program start in the autumn quarter with ancient Greek tragedy and philosophy? Further, why does it double down on just these two genres again in the winter quarter? In part, my answer today will be general, treating the question as asking partly, why begin with the ancient Greeks? In another part, however, my answer will give specific examples from the tragedy we read in the autumn, Sophocles' Antigone, and the philosophy that we read in the winter, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. The main reason to start with tragedy and philosophy is the same reason as why these were given a renaissance by Italian scholars and statesmen 900 years ago. Only in these texts can we observe the viewpoints of citizens who possess freedom and equality, and not just any freedom and equality, but the kinds that are specific to the ancient Greek city-state, the polis. The Greek version of freedom and the Greek version of equality form the core of the idea of citizenship that was used in the US Constitution, but few American citizens can formulate them or recognize that they are presently in grave danger. Much less do Americans tend to appreciate that Greek freedom and Greek equality form the minimum conditions for every other form of freedom and equality that people generally do appreciate, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, equal protection under the laws, and the general freedom to do what you want that's not illegal, and the equality to be treated with respect and security on a daily basis. All of these features of American life depend entirely on the preservation of the freedom and equality in citizenship that the founders derived from ancient Greek books. Here is how I will argue for all that. First, we shall see that the framers of the Constitution derived their core idea for constitutional government from the radical democracy of ancient Athens. That core idea is popular sovereignty through majority rule. Next, I shall argue, the Greek books present this core founding idea by recording the viewpoints from which popular sovereignty was exercised through majority rule. I will explain then how both tragedy and philosophy preserve this viewpoint of freedom. Finally, I will tell the backstory of why the Greeks developed these genres in the first place. This backstory will articulate the special nature of Greek freedom and equality. So on to reason one. The American founders took from ancient Athens the idea of popular sovereignty through majority rule. No other governments in all of history could serve as a model. Although the Roman Republic does serve the founders as a model in other respects, Rome does not model popular sovereignty. After Athens, popular sovereignty is not even formulated as an idea again until the 1300s, much less was it practiced in actual government. In adapting the Athenian idea of popular sovereignty to modern conditions, the American framers believed they were doing something unprecedented. This lack of precedent is a problem if you want to design a liberal education for citizens of this republic. It is frequently overlooked how important the ancient Athenian democracy was for the framers of the U.S. Constitution. Athens gave them the central idea of popular sovereignty. However, one usually hears that the founders regarded ancient Athens not as a model, but as an object lesson against direct democracy, what Madison calls the most pure democracy. It is true that Athens and other ancient Greek city-states were notorious among the founders for what they call turbulence, meaning internal division and civil strife, as well as wars between city-states. Moreover, the framers lumped together with the ancient Greek polis the, quote, modern Italian republics as democracies that suffered turbulence. And when they say modern Italian, they're talking about really the 13 and 1400s. Yet for all that, as clearly as the framers state their worry about turbulence, they also state that ancient Athens serves as one of their two main models of government. The other model is from modern Europe, namely the representation of the people in the legislature by deputies of their own election. Their goal was to keep what they valued from ancient Athens and the modern Italian city-states, and to avoid the problems those two faced. Hamilton states their goal as being, in Federalist number 9, as being that, quote, the excellences of republican government may be retained and its imperfections lessened or avoided, close quote. The excellences of republican government, Hamilton means, come from ancient Athens and its practice of popular sovereignty by means of majority rule. Madison speaks of the republics of ancient Greece and modern Italy as their models for popular government, when, in Federalist 10, he speaks of, quote, the valuable improvements made by the American constitutions on the popular models, both ancient and modern. Ancient Athens supplied the end, modern Europe the means for the new American system of popular sovereignty. For the record, let's review the full passage by Hamilton that I've just excerpted. Quote, the science of politics, however, like most other sciences, has received great improvement. The efficacy of various principles is now well understood, which were either not known at all or imperfectly known to the ancients. The regular distribution of power into distinct departments, the introduction of legislative balances and checks, the institution of courts composed of judges holding their offices during good behavior, the representation of the people in the legislature by deputies of their own election. These are wholly new discoveries, or have made their principal progress towards perfection in modern times. They are means, and powerful means, by which the excellences of republican government may be retained and its imperfections lessened or avoided. The founders distinguish between free government and popular government, both of which they intended the U.S. to be. Free government, also known as civil liberty, meant a government without a monarch or despot. Popular government takes free government one step further by placing government in the people. Rome was an example of free government that was not popular. For Hamilton, all free governments are republics, including the direct democracies of ancient Greece, but also the oligarchies of Sparta, Carthage, and Rome. By contrast, Madison reserves the word republic for what we would call representative democracy. For both authors, all republics have civil liberty, but not all republics are popular. Hamilton writes in Federalist 9 that the Greeks were the models for free government, in the sense of a government without a monarch or despot, sitting alone at the top of a hierarchy. Hamilton is arguing against those who oppose the proposed constitution and want instead a king, which Hamilton calls a despot. Hamilton grants that the ancient Greeks and more recent Italian cities serve as the models for monarch-free government, and also that both suffered much turbulence from faction, which is less of a problem under an autocrat. Quote, from the disorders that disfigure the annals of those republics, the advocates of despotism have drawn arguments, not only against the forms of republican government, but against the very principles of civil liberty. They have decried all free government as inconsistent with the order of society. Happily for mankind, stupendous fabrics reared on the basis of liberty, which have flourished for ages, have, in a few glorious instances, refuted their gloomy sophisms. Close quote. These stupendous fabrics must mean the Roman Republic before the emperors, and perhaps also the Republic of Venice, which, for all its inequality, nevertheless had avoided monarchy for 9 centuries. At the time of the Federalist Papers, Venice would not be conquered by Napoleon for a decade. Now, perhaps, is a good time to mention why Rome could not serve as a model for the essential idea of the American experiment. The Roman government was not popular enough. Because the Roman Senate was, quote, a Senate for life, as Madison writes in Federalist 63, it was, quote, unfit for the imitation as it is repugnant to the genius of America, close quote. Do note here, however, that the Roman government was a free government in the sense of having no monarch, just not popular. From free government, we turn to popular government. Madison speaks of the ancient Athenians as his model for the principle of popular government. Let's look at the passage from Federalist 14, where he states his special distinction between a republic and a democracy. Quote, the true distinction between these forms is that in a democracy, the people meet and exercise the government in person. In a republic, they assemble and administer it by their representatives and agents, close quote. A few lines later, he explains why people confuse these two terms, republic and democracy. He believes it's because the popular governments in antiquity were democracies, while the contemporary European governments, who are not popular, are the ones who use the new principle of elected representation. People confuse republics with direct democracies because, quote, most of the popular governments of antiquity were of the democratic species. And even in modern Europe, to which we owe the great principle of representation, no example is seen of a government wholly popular and founded at the same time wholly on that principle. If Europe has the merit of discovering this great principle, America can claim the merit of making the discovery the basis of unmixed and extensive republics, close quote. In other words, Madison sees the principle of popular government as arising out of the ancient democracies, but the modern principle of representation will combine with it to create not a democracy, but a republic, in the special Madisonian sense that has come to be called representative democracy. In this way, Madison restates the goal formulated by Hamilton in Federalist 9 as being that, quote, the excellences of republican government may be retained and its imperfections lessened or avoided, close quote. These excellences are primarily the popular basis of the ancient Greek republics. Finally, in Federalist 22, Hamilton writes that, quote, the fundamental maxim of republican government requires that the sense of the majority should prevail, close quote. As I said before, in adapting the Athenian idea of popular sovereignty to modern conditions, the American framers believed they were doing something unprecedented. This lack of precedent is a problem if you want to design a liberal education for citizens of this free republic. But at least we do have the sources from whence the founders took the central ideas of freedom and equality and popular sovereignty through majority rule, and those sources are the ancient Greeks. And now I'll move to reason number 2. Several reasons are given for why the books of the ancient Greeks are important and should be read, which are as wrong as they are commonplace. Here are 3 of them. The Greek books are valuable, some people say, but I deny, not because they are somehow shaped the future, nor, as some other people say, because they are our heritage, unless we're modern Greeks, nor, thirdly, because they possess an ineffable quality called greatness. Rather, these texts are valuable because they give us a window into the internal workings of communities exercising popular sovereignty through majority rule. They allow us moderns to eavesdrop as the ancient authors, who were free and equal citizens, address ancient readers, who are also free and equal citizens. Our goal in a liberal education, that is, an education for freedom, is to learn from these books how their authors and audiences managed their communal sovereignty, how they conceptualized their own freedom and equality, and how they put these into practice. To learn from these books, to read them well, we have to adopt the viewpoints and preoccupations of the original audience. We have to reconstruct these in imagination after careful study and close reading. The Greeks developed literary genres to assist these conversations, tragedy first and foremost, and then philosophy. Each of these genres is explicitly addressed to the audience in their capacity as citizens. Tragedy is performed in a civic religious festival dedicated to the god Dionysus. Everything about this festival emphasizes the membership of the individual in the citizen body as an undifferentiated whole. Philosophy aims to help citizens improve their abilities to deliberate well as individuals about decisions, and during these deliberations, to speak persuasively and to listen critically. I will return to both these genres and explain what I mean for each with references to books we read in the first year of the basic program. But first, I want to prepare you for hearing how tragedy and philosophy had political aspects by relating the social and political conditions that stimulated authors and audiences to invent those genres. In other words, I'm going to move on to reason 3 before I give the full exposition of reason 2. To review the structure of my argument, reason 1 is that we start with tragedy and philosophy because the framers used the Greek classics as the source for the most important 2 or 3 ideas in the Constitution. Reason 2 is because the genres of tragic drama and philosophy give witness to the conversations among free and equal citizens about how to manage their freedom as citizens. Reason 3 relates the political context for reason number 2. So reason number 3 is the backstory for these 2 genres. This backstory describes a different type of cause for the 4-year program to begin with tragedy and philosophy. This cause explains why the Greeks developed these genres in the first place. This backstory is the articulation of Greek freedom and equality. Greek freedom and equality can only be understood in relation to sovereignty. Freedom and equality exist as concepts and in practice only as functions of the independence of the polis from external control. The freedom and equality of individual citizens were never goals of the polis, but were rather the necessary means to the final goal of the whole polis. The final goal was internal stability and the stability of the Constitution. Sovereignty itself is a modern Western concept. It translates the Greek word Archē, which has a wider range of meanings than mere sovereignty. For a state to have sovereignty or Archē at the core means it is free of control by another. Sovereignty thus consists in a particular kind of freedom, the freedom from domination or the command of another. This external non-domination is the essence of sovereignty. In Thucydides, Pericles equates Athenians' Archē, or empire, which is another way of translating the word. Pericles equates the Athenians' Archē over their allies with what he calls their liberty, which he describes as non-domination at sea. He says, quote, "Over the whole sea you are sovereign, both as far as you ply it now, and more, if ever you wish it. And there is no one, neither king nor any nation either at present, who will prevent you sailing with your navy in its current state of readiness." This, says Pericles, defines the freedom of the Athenians as well as their sovereignty. Non-domination extends inwardly inside the city as well. Internally, the people who manage the external sovereignty also have non-domination toward their fellows and frequently even exercise rule over them. It is most easy to imagine this internal sovereignty as residing within a single ruler, an autocrat or monarch, who monopolizes it and occupies the single highest rank. The polis lacks such an autocrat, as we'll see in a minute when we talk about the history. The shape of power in the polis was not like a pyramid with the king at the apex, but resembled rather a plateau. The topmost level was wide and flat and made room for many people to occupy the highest status, all on an equal footing with each other. No one on this level can be dominated by any of the others. Instead of continually fighting it out, these multiple would-be rulers coordinate with each other to share the sovereignty. In the ancient Greek conceptual world, having a share means you are equal because shares are equal. To ensure non-domination among these equal shares, the polis has no status higher than citizenship. With no status higher than yours, you are at the top, but so is everyone else, with the result that there is a lot of equality at the top and no one to restrict any of you from participating in this top level of government or rule. The freedom from this restriction is the narrow sense that I mean by Greek freedom. The Athenians called it isegoria, which literally means equal access to speak at the assembly, but is translated usually as freedom of speech. Not just the name, but the very idea ambiguates between freedom and equality. So notice the Greek literally says equal speech, but we translate it usually as freedom of speech. So not just the name, but the very idea is ambiguous. In this way, Greek freedom and equality imply each other. One is free because all are equal. One is equal because all are free. The ancient historian Moses Finley says, isegoria, the universal right to speak in the assembly, was sometimes employed by Greek writers as a synonym for democracy. The citizen is free because no status is higher and all shares are equal. If someone takes a larger share of Archē, all others lose a bit of freedom. This is why Greek freedom is not the freedom to do anything you please, but rather the freedom to rule yourself politically because you have a share in the overall sovereignty. The freedom to do as you please presupposes isegoria, Greek freedom. In the history of human events, sovereignty has rarely been shared, much less shared among the people. It is therefore interesting both how it came to be shared, as well as the method by which power was made popular in the actual government. Sovereignty becomes popular or shared by means of the Constitution. The Constitution, according to Aristotle, is used by the city to distribute its sovereignty into various offices for citizens to hold, including the attending of assemblies and jury trials. Greek freedom and equality were political and practical. They were about attending assemblies and jury trials and about holding office. These three modes of participation embodied the citizens' share of sovereignty in the following senses. The legislative assembly's resolutions were sovereign in that they were final. Similarly, the verdicts of the jury courts were sovereign because they could not be appealed. As for holding office, the very idea of office was expressed by the same word as sovereignty itself, Archē. The concept of sovereignty helps us understand what is special about Greek freedom. By Greek freedom, I mean the citizens' freedom to participate without restriction in the sovereign government by holding Archē, or office. Aristotle says that even attending the assembly or sitting on juries were forms of holding office on an indefinite basis. Solon was felt to have truly freed the Athenians because the constitution he wrote gave, quote, a share of citizenship to even the poorest category of citizen, those who owned no land. These, says Plutarch, had a share of citizenship by serving in the assembly and on legal juries. In other words, they had freedom and equality. Aristotle expresses how citizens share sovereignty by means of freedom and equality in the following words. This is from Politics, Book 6, so it's not from a year one text. One mark of freedom, he says, is taking turns ruling and being ruled. Now, this is the mechanism for majority rule on the basis of equality. A second mark is the cause of the freedom in the first. Aristotle continues. Another mark of freedom is living as you like. People say this is a function of freedom, inasmuch as living not as he likes belongs to a man in slavery. For this is a second marker of democracy, and from it comes the claim not to be ruled, in the best case by anybody, but otherwise by taking turns, and it contributes in this way to the freedom that is distributed on an equal basis. I now return to the genres of tragedy and philosophy. In Antigone, Dionysus, the god, is named in the chorus at the climax of the play. He is the god of freedom and also of the erasure of boundaries and of masking and of ecstasy, both of which help the individual group up with the rest of his group. Here we see a link between the social group and a political system based on rule by the demos, the common people. Both year one tragedies, Antigone and the Oresteia by Aeschylus, deal expressly with the political values of the democratic citizens who are sitting in the audience. In Antigone, there is the theme of advice and deliberation. I'll talk about that in depth in just a moment. In the Oresteia, it is the democratization of the homicide courts, and I won't say more about that. Dionysus had a democratic feel to the ancients that is not accessible to modern outsiders. He was not explicitly a political god or even a god of the polis. If anything, he was a rural god due to his connection with the vine and other crops. But he was explicitly the god of freedom. One of his nicknames was Dionysus Eleuther, or Dionysus the Free. This must be the freedom of release, such as the release that comes with ecstasy, whether caused by wine or other excitation. The Romans felt that they had a cognate to Dionysus among their own native gods in the one they named Liber, which is just the Latin word for free. Among the Romans, Liber was considered a god for the mass of people, not the elites, for the plebeians, not the patricians. At the climax of Antigone, Creon realizes that he has made an error in sentencing Antigone to entombment, and he orders his staff to grab tools to break open the tomb as he hurries there himself to save her. Then the episode ends and the final chorus comes on stage. They begin singing. Students rightly have questions about why the choruses in Greek tragedies say just the things they say. Here, the chorus might seem to be oblivious to what is happening in the play because they come on stage and immediately start singing a hymn to Dionysus, who has previously not come up in the play. They sing, "Thebes out of all cities you honor as the most high with your thunderstruck mother. And now, as the city at all levels is gripped by violent sickness, come with a cleansing or purifying footstep over the slope of Parnassus or over the moaning straits." In the next stanza, the chorus ends its ode by asking Dionysus to appear, quote unquote, or materialize together with his raving Maenads or Bacchae. Then the ode ends and the action of the story returns to the stage. It is a messenger reporting the sad scene at Antigone's tomb because, of course, Creon recognized his mistake too late to fix it. Both Antigone and Creon's own son are now dead, just moments before he arrived to prevent the consequences of his own bad judgment. By implication, this harsh lesson in self-knowledge for Creon belongs to the nature of tragedy itself and also to its patron god, Dionysus. Dionysus was a harsh purifier. The chorus is inviting Dionysus to come with a cleansing or purifying step, where the word means purifying or cleansing of defilement, guilt, or pollution. If you've taken year 2 autumn quarter, you will have read the play about Dionysus by Euripides, named the Bacchae, and you will know what a mixed blessing it is when the god Dionysus comes to town. He has a very destructive way of purifying and cleansing the community. His presence seems to stoke wild abandon and reckless violence. You will also have read Aristotle's work Poetics, where Aristotle introduces the concept of the dramatic catharsis, the purging of the tragic emotions of pity and fear. Well, here in Antigone, Sophocles uses the same word in its adjectival form, katharsios, which I have up there on the slide, for what the chorus wants from Dionysus. Dionysus may come to save the city, but he is no respecter of persons. In fact, he barely tolerates human individuality at all. The life of no particular individual is guaranteed over any other. Dionysus makes all humans all alike. He reduces us to a basis of similarity, no matter the cost. Woe to any mere mortal who puts on airs that they stand above their fellow mortals, especially when those fellow mortals are one's fellow citizens, one's free and equal fellow citizens. And this is what is democratic about Dionysus. As I say, he barely tolerates human individuality at all in either of his 2 main modes of acting. One way he acts is through wine and states of drunken ecstasy. The ecstatic person is literally and etymologically standing outside, ekstasis, standing outside of themselves. They are beside themselves. A second way Dionysus acts is through masking. Both of these are ways for the person to spend time not as an individual, but as, when drunk in a crowd, one among many like persons, or when masking, suppressing one's everyday individual self and substituting a put-on identity. Dionysus reduces humans to our least common denominator and renders each of us much more simply human than otherwise. The text of Antigone diagnoses Creon's mistake differently than perhaps modern readers might. For Sophocles and his original audience, Creon's crime has been anti-democratic governing practices. This mindset or mental state is what must be purged and purified from the city for the whole community to be safe again. In Antigone, as in Bacchae, Dionysus brings release from trouble, but it is a destructive release to counteract a prior destruction of citizen freedom. The text of the play is very specific about the part of Creon's leadership that violates republican government. It's the way he makes policy decisions. In the real-world government of ancient Athens, the process of making policy was not concentrated in just one leader, but was spread out and distributed among all the citizens. The process of decision-making was thus of overriding importance to the regular functioning of the government. The word for decision-making is Boule, which is also sometimes translated as advice, counsel, policy, or deliberation. In the vocabulary of the Athenian democracy, Boule was the name for the individual citizen's contribution to policy decisions. If you made a speech in the assembly about the law or decree being debated, you were said to give advice, to give Boule to the demos. As I said a few minutes ago, the chorus in Antigone mentions Dionysus right before the climax of the play, right after Creon has seen his fatal mistake and resolved to save Antigone if he can. Now I want us to look at the language that the play uses to portray his resolution, his decision to reverse his policy. You will recognize something from the language of the 5th century democracy. Creon tells the chorus, who are the city elders, that he feels stuck at an impasse now that he sees he was wrong. It is a huge moment in the play, for the autocrat abandons his privilege of absolute command to consult with the people he governs. The chorus of elders gives the autocrat democratic advice. They reply, "Now you must seek good counsel and take advice." And the Greek word is eoboulia. The eu element means good, good advice or good counsel. Creon then asks, "What must I do? Speak, and I shall obey." They go on, the citizens go on to advise that he save Antigone, and Creon takes their counsel. He takes their advice. This political language is what prepares the way for the choral ode that we just read that calls on Dionysus to appear. As we have seen, Creon is too late to save Antigone and also his son, Haemon. We do not witness this scene on stage, but are told it by a messenger. The messenger has the last pro-democratic, anti-autocratic lines in the play. He says that as Haemon breathed his last, embracing the corpse of Antigone, quote, "So he has made it very clear to men that to reject good counsel is a crime." And the word translated as rejecting good counsel is aboulia, where the element means, it's privative, it means non. Consequently, on this reading of the play, Creon's tragic error, his crime, if you will, is diagnosed as non-democratic governance, the practice of one-man rule and keeping his own counsel. Creon, in office, did not treat the citizens he ruled as his equals. If he had treated them as equals, he would have treated them all along as potential sources for good ideas. This may seem trivial to Americans today, who cannot imagine living in a society where people do not rise according to their merits. But the Athenians recognized it as a difference between their form of government and the alternatives. When we turn to philosophy, it may perhaps surprise you that ancient Greek philosophy was oriented toward the city-state from even its earliest stages in the Archaic age. Scholars usually think of the earliest philosophy as really more like natural science than what would later be called philosophy. But even the earliest so-called natural scientific side of philosophy used the vocabulary of life shared in the polis to express ideas of cosmology. The earliest philosophers held as a central tenet of their worldview the principle of reciprocity, symmetry, and balance. More than a century before Sophocles, the philosopher Anaximander of Miletus, in modern-day Turkey, Anaximander expresses the cosmological principle that runs the universe at its most abstract level, and he characterizes it like this: from what things have, we got to put the right emphasis in here. From what things have their generation, into this have they also their destruction, according to necessity. For they pay a penalty and restitution to each other for their injustice in chronological order. And the phrase that I've translated as paying a penalty is literally giving justice, DK, and the word for payback is tissus. In this fragment, we can see that one of the ways the earliest Greek philosophers tried to make sense of what we now call nature was by using concepts from the city-state, that is, concepts from politics, such as reciprocity and the Greek idea of justice, which has inherent in it the idea that it's a response to a previous wrong. The topic of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which is the philosophy that we read in the winter quarter of year one, the topic is how to attain the good life or happiness. In the first two books, Aristotle defines virtue as an activity of the soul in accordance with reason. Oh, and you need virtue to get happiness. Then Aristotle, at the beginning of book 3, he breaks down this activity of the soul to reveal that he refers to times when we make choices after first stopping to think about it. A given virtue like courage, or virtue as a whole, is when we think well about our choice, make a good choice, and then put our choice into action by, well, acting or implementing it. The final 2/3 of the ethics concerns the several virtues and the different contexts in which we have to make our choices. Making the right choice is very context specific. That is why virtue is not easy. As a response to this difficulty, Aristotle recommends that a person develop their ethical character to predispose them to make the right context-specific choices throughout their life. All of Aristotle's scheme of ethical activity, virtue, and activity of the soul, all of it, is ultimately political and republican and democratic. It is all ultimately about how the individual citizen may best manage his freedom and equality. And if you want to put it in terms of Antigone, how the average citizen can give Creon the right advice. We've just seen from Antigone how important in the Athenian scheme of politics was the activity they called deliberation, Boule, the giving and taking of advice or counsel before voting on a final decision. In the Ethics, Aristotle uses the same vocabulary to describe the process of deliberation in personal life that happens entirely within and inside of the individual agent, the individual citizen. And here's the thing, Aristotle's ethics applies really only to a person who is a citizen. This is so even though Aristotle says explicitly that the ethics applies to personal private life, and the sequel, called Aristotle's Politics, extends the basic view to the level of the polis and its government, in whose sovereignty the citizen, of course, has a share. Here's how that works. The fundamental axiom of ancient Athenian democratic politics might be stated thus: you're not the boss of me. The corollary is that I am not the boss of you either. We saw earlier that the Greek city-state, the polis, had sovereignty, or Archē in Greek, and that it shared this Archē out equally to the citizens. Aristotle's ethics applies only to people who have this kind of equality, who practice this kind of freedom. For Aristotle, an ethical choice is a free choice, a choice made by a person in a condition of being not dominated by another person or group of persons. This will become clear if we analyze a paragraph out of Book 3. Aristotle has just been explaining that we make choices after first deliberating, and that we deliberate only about things that we want. Aristotle suggests that there is a basic timeline for making a decision. First, we want something, or feel an appetite for it, or feel attracted to it, or we feel an appetite for a non-specific object like food rather than a particular food. Only items from this group will we then deliberate about. For Aristotle, it does not make sense to say that you are deliberating about something you don't want or don't care about. Deliberation is a form of personal investment. The stage of deliberation is a stage of making arguments, using reasons, weighing the costs and benefits of the options, and so on. Stage 3 is when we make a choice. We consummate our deliberation by bringing it to a close. In the Greek, choice, the word for choice, denotes a kind of sharp seizure here at the end of the squishy deliberative process. The word for desire or appetite in stage 1, the key word in stage 1 is orexis, which is from the verb oregomai. Oregomai literally means I am stretching myself out toward. In the concrete sense, this verb is used frequently of reaching out with one or both hands to grab something. The word for choice in stage 3 is prohairesis. This is from a verb that literally means seize beforehand, maybe even snatch. So you see that when Aristotle speaks of wanting or desiring something, he means not exactly what we mean, but a stage a little farther along the way. When you feel desire in this sense, you are already in a position to fulfill your desire. Your hand hovers over the cookie, as it were. Similarly, the word for choice is a little more final, a little more committed than our idea of choosing something, unless we imagine that choosing the red ball instead of the blue ball simply consists in actually lifting the red ball away from the blue one and toward oneself. Now you are prepared to read the paragraph from Aristotle's Book 3 of the Ethics, where he expresses what I've just told you in terms that he derives from politics. Aristotle writes, "The object of deliberation and the object of choice is the same, except that of choice is already distinct. For the object of choice is what is judged on the basis of deliberation. For each man stops investigating how he will act when he leads or traces the Archē back into himself and into that part of himself that leads. For this is the part that makes choices. And this is clear also on the basis of ancient constitutions, which Homer dramatizes, for his kings would make choices and then announce it to the people. Since the object of choice, deliberation, appetite, it's all the same object. Since this object belongs to things that are up to us, choice also would be appetite informed by deliberation for things that are up to us. For since we judged after first deliberating, we desire according to deliberation." Notice here where Aristotle imagines a person thinking, "What shall I do?" He seems to imply that this person is making a mental list of the steps that the action will take when he says that the person will lead or trace the Archē back into himself. And I translate Archē here as the initiative or the first steps of the action. The image is suggested of the ethical agent calculating backward from the end of the intended action out in the exterior world, back through time and space, until step 1 of the action, the Archē, is found to reside within him or herself. Archē here is our word for sovereignty or empire in the political sense. Archē here is our word for sovereignty or empire in the political sense. Here it is sometimes translated as, quote, "the principle of action," close quote, but I don't really know what that means. It seems to me to be used here to bring out the sense that the agent possesses within himself the initiative or the authority. And the word authority is from another Latin word for initiative, auctoritas. It means whatever it takes to start the action. The agent possesses that within himself. Importantly, it is implied that since this starting point, this initiative, resides inside the agent, it is implied that the agent is not dominated by anyone outside the agent. This is like Pericles said of the Athenian navy. Who's going to stop it sailing wherever it wants? Next, Aristotle reaches back to Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Both of these have scenes where the boss does his deliberating on his own and then simply makes an announcement. Aristotle's point is that kings make it clear that the part of a person, like the part of a constitution, that does the leading is also the one that does the choosing. The one who does the leading, note well, possesses the hegemony or the sovereignty, the Archē, in Aristotle's terminology. This is a person who has no master, who answers to no one. You're not the boss of me, in other words. Now that final idea in the passage, the list of things which we may be said to desire is restricted to things that are, quote, up to us, close quote. Some translators render this phrase, things that are within our power. That is an over-translation, but it does bring the meaning out accurately. In other words, you cannot desire something that is physically impossible, like falling upward, but also you cannot desire something that is impossible for being beyond your control or reach. In other words, it's the kind of desire where you are already in position to satisfy it. Your hand is hovering above the cookie. You've already reached out. Now all you have to do is grab it. The implication of having an Archē inside you, of being able to say that no one is the boss of you, and of having a range of options that are up to us, is that you are a free person in the sense of being not enslaved, but you are also not in a context where you may well have a boss, like a craftsman in ancient Athens. Labor, even skilled labor, was a borderline case for Aristotle between freedom and slavery, because when you work for someone else, they do all the deciding about final ends, about the ultimate goals. All of this is to say, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics is a manual for freedom. The whole work concerns how to make deliberate decisions well. A person only faces the kind of decisions Aristotle cares about if that person is a free and equal citizen living in a city of fellow free and equal citizens. Aristotle's book is for someone who has to make up his own mind, who is not told what to do. In other words, a free citizen. The book concerns decisions of the kind only a non-dominated, free person faces. In conclusion, the reasons for beginning a liberal education with ancient Greek tragic drama and philosophy all have to do with the fact that a properly liberal education is an education for freedom. These texts served the framers of the American system of government as sources for the core ideas of political or civic freedom and the equality among citizens. These texts continue to set a high standard for self-rule, for government on the basis of consensus and non-domination among the body of free citizens. It is not too trite to say that we read tragedy and philosophy to learn how to be free and equal. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kendall. That's great. Well, very interesting. There's a lot of questions. So let me get started in relaying those to you. Just one second here. Okay. All right. So going back to the beginning, we had a sort of preliminary question from Charles Fout, who asks, do you think knowledge of the original languages of the originals is necessary?
So that's a question near and dear to my heart. I would say it's really good, but it's not necessary. That said, it's important enough that a lot of the, okay, so I'm going to think out loud, and I apologize ahead of time. I've noticed that when I go reading well, I call it reading for freedom and equality, finding the evidence of freedom and equality in ancient Greek texts. It's on every page. Every page is soaked in freedom and equality, but it doesn't always come out in translation. And there are various reasons for this. One of the things that doesn't come out is when a Greek word is used with slightly different, or used in ways that call translators to use different English words for the same Greek word. And this is, totally sound in terms of, translation practice, except when you're dealing with a technical terminology. So a lot, maybe all modern translators, all the ones that I know of, don't really seem to understand how steady state is the Greek political vocabulary. So that like the very crucial word boule, about deliberation. This can be translated in a way that makes it sort of recede into the background of whatever passage it appears in. And let's see, what's another one? Well, just equality, because there are tons of like small ways of saying on an equal basis. So frequently I notice those phrases will be under-translated. Now, that said, I don't want to discourage anybody who wants to learn ancient Greek. Zoe put my email address in the chat, so yeah. They'll contact. But so yeah, not really necessary, but you need to, if you don't know the ancient languages, then some good footnotes to the translation are indispensable. Thanks for your question.
All right, next up, Jay Tremblay says, much is made of the lack of consideration by the founders of the idea of political parties, especially during the Constitutional Convention, notwithstanding the Federalist Papers' discussion of the dangers of factions. How did or did not the Athenian experience in this regard affect the founders' later judgments?
Thanks for your question, Jay. That's a really good question. So faction does not really seem to apply in the ancient city-state in the same way that it implies I'll say modern, 1700s and forward. So in the ancient Greek city-state, I guess you'd have to say it's faction, but it tends to be like between the relatively wealthy elites, the so-called few, and the many, the demos. That demos tended to mean, yes, the capital P people, but practically it meant that in a demos crassy, where the people ruled, everybody said, well, at Athens, the poor people rule. They're in charge. The government is for their sake. So that tends to be the kind of faction that you had in the ancient city-state. Now, you know what, Zoe, I'm kind of losing. What was the point of Jay's question? Like, where is it that the question mark appears? Just about the differences?
Yeah. How did the Athenian experience in this regard affect the founders' later judgments about parties?
Yeah. So as I said, I didn't go all into it, but the founders thought, and they were a little wrong about this, that Athens was quote unquote turbulent. And that it was actually less. There's an impression that still persists that the Athenian democracy was less stable than it actually was. That to one side, the founders thought of it as turbulent, and I would say that here's another idea that will be familiar to you from year 4 Federalist Papers: the tyranny of the majority. That would be what the founders take as a lesson from the ancient Greek city-state faction, because the poor tended to drastically outnumber the few. So yeah, thanks, Jay.
Okay, cool. Next up, we have Ray Lucchesi asks, no, I've got to go get the door. Although tragedy provides a window into the life of the heroes of the Greeks, it's unclear how they provide us with an understanding of the people in popular government.
Yeah, if you need to run, I can handle it.
I'll be back in just a sec.
So let's see, Ray asked, although tragedy provides a window, it's unclear how they provide us an understanding of the people in popular government. Yes, it is unclear, Ray. Not to put too fine a point on it, that's why we need teachers of the ancient Greek tragedy. Because one of the things that's exciting is, because Greek tragedy it's just really, like, especially when you like first read 2 or 3 of them, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, just as a literary genre, the stuff that you're asked to imagine. But when you start looking at it through the lens of freedom and equality and constitutional government, then it starts to appear in odd and unexpected ways. And I think that the ways appear odd and unexpected to me because I'm a modern American. I'm not sure that it was too strange to the ancient Athenians. The ancient Athenians, they recognized, and this kind of goes back to the first question about the ancient Greek language. The audience members of a tragic play, they would recognize, it would resonate in their ears that the lingo, the vocab from regular everyday political life was appearing on the stage in the mouths of these mythical people like Agamemnon or Antigone. so that's why I was trying to be a little bit humorous by saying we need teachers, but that is one of the roles of a teacher is to point out like when what characters on the Greek stage are saying resonates also in the political arena. Yeah, is that helpful? I feel confident Ray would say that I answered his question. Thank you, Ray.
Okay.
I see you've got another one down in the queue. So
yeah, here, I'm back to going through them now. So this one is from Joseph Barry Murtaugh, who says, from the beginning, questions to be answered and implemented: who are the people and what are the powers?
Let's see here. Let's see here. So I'm going to guess maybe the question means like who are the people, as in is the demos in the ancient. So the demos, like I said, includes or actually emphasizes the poor, but also the people means citizens. So it doesn't mean all the human beings. So I'm not going to say the word people. I'm going to say the phrase the people. That is different than human beings. So the people is a subset of the human beings who live in any given city. This is why the Greeks are like totally fine. They don't even bat an eye at what we would recognize as radical inequality in their cities. We say, you guys are a slave society. And they say, yeah, but the slaves are not citizens. And they think that fixes it. So from their standpoint, the people include all of the citizens, but only the citizens. And then I don't really know how to answer the powers. I tried to leave the word power out, except when the specific Greek word power is used because it's so abstract. Maybe I could say, how about offices? Power under an ancient Greek constitution is metered out to the people on an equal basis. And you could say it's the powers, but it's also in the offices. And that Greek word Archē that means sovereignty, they just put that in the plural to mean political offices. So it's like, because my city-state has Archē, nobody, no outside power runs us. Because we have Archē, I have a share of Archē, and I can run for one of the Archē. So I hope that's helpful. Joseph?
Thanks, Kendall. Paxton Murphy asks, is equality and equity the same? Can you elaborate on this?
They are not. Aristotle has a passage in, I want to say it's book 5 of the Ethics, where he talks about that. Let's see here. Equity is, it seems to really, I was going to say the ancient Greek preserves the modern meaning. I think you know what I mean if I say that. You don't have to change what you what you believe these words mean to read Aristotle. Equity is a way is equilibrate a word? It should be, to calibrate on a basis of equality. The OED should say that word was coined today. So equity is when the facts need a little jiggering so that equality can be the end result. And Aristotle has a great metaphor. Evidently, there was a tool from bricklaying or masonry. Not bricks. They built with some bricks, but really he's talking about masonry, where you want to set a large stone on another one, and you want it to fit really well. And there was something called like the lesbian ruler, and it was I think he says it's a strip of lead, and you can you place it on one on the lower stone. So that you can take an imprint in the lead of the shape of the stone face, and then you go find a stone that fits that best. And you use that stone. Theoretically, all of the stones, are cubes or, the same dimensions. But practically speaking, they don't fit together so well. And so you have to apply some equity, says Aristotle. Thanks, Paxton.
Great. I'm going to save Ray Lucchese's second question to the end because we have a bunch more, but we hopefully will have time for it. Greg Gosick says, since ancient Greece was also a slave society, did its structuring of slavery have any precedential weight on the founders' treatment of that institution in America?
I haven't seen that at all. It's Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a scholar of the Federalist Papers. I read them, and I teach 3 or 4 of them in the curriculum. And I'll tell you what I've done. I've taken the index and I looked under G for Greece, A for Athens, and R for Rome, and I looked at all those passages. And then you get the whole thing online, and you can do word searches. And I have not found anything about that. Now, one thing is they didn't really know that much about ancient slavery because not that much is known. And what we do know, or what we think we know about it, has mostly been the result of modern scientific research since 1970 or even 1980. And in fact, it's pretty hard to find out good stuff on ancient Greek slavery, if you can believe it. But it's true.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The next comment, Padalea, actually, I think is just agreeing with something you explained just a minute ago, but she says, I believe equity is in nature a correction of elements leading to equality. So that sounds like what you were explaining with the lesbian rule.
Thanks for the backup, Pat.
And Steve Barrett comments, interesting that hierasis is translated opinion and heresy, especially by the church.
Oh, yeah, I don't know how that happened.
That's sort of interesting. Then Jerry Ree says, I've heard great significance placed on coupled terms like we live in a republic and not democracy, and freedom is non-interference and not non-domination. But even after deliberation, we as a people forget such nuances in our conversations. What does Greek tragedy and philosophy promote as Archē in such complex conversations, especially in light of a citizenry who have this defect of forgetting and is readily willing to use it?
Let's see. Thanks, Jerry. I'm going to have to scratch my chin a little bit. Well, let's see. So your question is, what does tragedy and philosophy promote as Archē? In such, okay, so Archē, well, so Archē as a freedom word means non-domination, first and foremost. But it can also mean that, if I hold an office, if I hold an Archē, then I can say, I am the boss of you, but only because you agree to it. And it's only on a temporary basis. Let's see, I'm thinking of a play by Euripides called I think it's in The Suppliant Women. Is that the one where Theseus, who's a mythical king of Athens, I think he's describing the sharing of sovereignty in the same terms that I used, the sharing of Archē on an equal basis among the citizens. So I don't know. I'm kind of hemming and hawing to answer your question, Jerry. I think I'm going to declare that I've answered it successfully. And Jerry, if I didn't, type something else into the chat. I have to say that when people place great significance on distinguishing republic from, when they say we live in a republic, not a democracy, I hope that on the basis of what I said about Hamilton Madison, like you see that's actually somebody who hadn't really read the Federalist Papers. It's like, yeah, Madison says that, but what he wants is the kind of republic that we call now a representative democracy. And then freedom being non-interference. I don't. So the modern talk about freedom, among people who are not trying to figure out ancient Greece, but trying to figure out the world we live in, seems to, I think they distinguish between non-interference and non-domination. But I don't think it's really necessarily the Greek sense. The Greek sense of freedom, as exercised by a person, is my ability to go to the assembly. You can't stop me. I'm going to go to the assembly and I'm going to vote on what we're making for laws or foreign policy or decrees, or I'm going to go to court and I'll sit on a jury and I can vote, guilty or innocent, guilty or not guilty. And so that's what Greek freedom means on the individual basis. That's to have a share of Archē, to have a share of that non-domination by international powers. I have to exercise isegoria. I have to exercise my freedom of speech, my equality of speech. And I'm beating around the bush to get up to this final point, which is in modern America, that's the vote. So freedom The ancient Greek freedom is really about voting rights, is the way it cashes out in a Madisonian republic, such as we have, where we vote for our representatives. There, I think I rescued my answer. I hope Jerry is happy.
Sounds good. Okay, George Perez asks, how do we reconcile democratic principles on the one hand and the practice of slavery on the other, operating within a democratic society? Additionally, citizenship was, in ancient Greece, limited usually to men of wealth and position, excluding women, slaves, and others. Thus, democracy appears to have several qualifiers and not true freedom and equality for all people within a given democratic society.
Thanks, George. So I have to say, it may make me sound bad, but I love the question, especially the first question is, how do you reconcile democratic principles with the practice of slavery in ancient Athens, ancient Syracuse, other ancient democracies? Is the ancient Greeks would say, what do you mean by principle? A democratic principle? It's a practice. It's the way we've agreed among the citizens to treat each other. That's like saying, why can't all the staff at the country club have the full rights and privileges, get tea times, get the good tea times? It's because the country club is for the members. And so a polis is for the members, the owners, the citizens. So the Greeks would just see no problem at all. They didn't think of freedom and equality as values, as like, highfalutin. They thought like, these are the terms of engagement. The reason I have freedom is not that I would otherwise, be enslaved, but that there'd be a fight between you and me, a general melee of all these people who are like roughly equal. And a couple of centuries ago, our fathers and grandfathers, great-grandfathers got together and said, no more fighting. We're going to make a constitution. We're going to agree to not do things by force. We're going to agree to transact, to use the phrase, government by discussion. And if somebody said, what about the slaves? They'd say, well, they should continue to work. What's your problem? The question doesn't even arise. That is a very modern thing to think about everybody else, to think about humans in general. Let's see. So that is how you square the democratic principles. Like for the Greeks, these were practical principles in that sense, but they were not values, ideas. There's nothing spiritual about them. Let's see.
I would just put in a short note there too. I mean, their different democracies had different citizenship requirements as well. So Athens was sort of known for having the broadest citizenship, which included, as you said, people who don't own land. Other democracies might not have had that broad a citizenship. So the criteria for citizenship could vary dependent on the city.
Thanks for that, Zoe. And I think that's one of the things that, like, Syracuse, for those of you in year 4, we're reading Thucydides. I think the Syracusan democracy, one of the debates is like, how broad-based was that? Athens was so broad-based that one of the complaints that one oligarch has is like, he says, you can't even tell by the way people dress who's free and who's slave. And this was one of the complaints. And let's see here. So ancient Greece. Another thing is that, like Zoe was saying, is no Greek thought that they had to square the idea of like a property requirement for being a full citizen. So like at Sparta, if you lost your property, which was illegal, so don't do it, then you could fall out of the top echelon of being a Spartan, a Spartiate hoplite. But a property qualification did not strike the archaic and classical Greeks of any polis, of any ideology, as inconsistent with freedom and equality. A different world. Thanks, George.
Great. And then Ajoy Vasher says, isn't it a quite trivial characterization of initiative / self-empowerment if we all have the, quote, freedom to do that as activities, objectives that have no reliance on other things? I'm trying to see if there's a way to make this question. I'm a little confused by it.
Maybe
we all have the freedom to do that.
Is the freedom?
Yeah.
Maybe there's an is missing between that and let's see. In a quite trivial characterization of all we have the freedom. Yes. I think Aristotle would say, like, that is trivial. That's the definition of trivial. It's something that doesn't have an impact on other people, but also where you don't have to coordinate with other people, because if it's truly important, it's going to have an impact on more than one, life.
Okay, great. And then I'm going to go back to Ray's other question, which is directly about Thucydides. He says, even though the assembly decided to put the, and he's got a question, I think it's the Mytileneans is what he's referring to death. And then he says, Creon was able to reverse this decision. So it didn't seem that the assembly's pronouncements were final in Thucydides. I don't think Creon is the person he's thinking of, but
Cleon.
Yeah.
But it's also Cleon was the guy who wanted it to go forward.
Yeah.
And
Dionysus was the other one. Yeah.
Yeah. Who doesn't seem, he has no personality outside that passage.
Yeah. He only shows up there.
So let's see, what was the question? Oh yeah, well, yeah, you're absolutely right. Good question, Ray. I can tell you've been reading closely. But we have a footnote, thankfully, in the edition of Thucydides that we use that explains that this was totally crazy for the assembly to reconsider a question. Like just statistically, they didn't do it, but also procedurally, it was a big deal. And, they would have to like sort of freeze business that was on the schedule, on the agenda, to go back and just, relitigate the day before. And so absolutely, Ray, that's part of the reason Thucydides thinks that particular incident was so important. And then we also run into it also in book 6.
Yep.
Nicias, when the Athenians are about to send off the Sicilian expedition, Nicias wants to put it to a vote again. And they say, Nicias, now come on, everybody's on board. So, but once again, the whole idea is like the very idea of trying to do a revote is anathema to the way things usually work.
Great. Well, that seems to be the end of the questions. So, and we're pretty much at time, so that worked out pretty well. Well, thank you again, Kendall, for a really terrific lecture. And I'm going to go ahead and allow everybody to unmute themselves to give congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendall.
Well done.
Very well.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thanks, Kendall.
You.
Thank you.
Sign me up.
Thank
Sign
you.
me.
Thank you,
Thank
Kendall.
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Great
me.
job. Thanks, Kendall.
You.
Thanks.
Well, this is
Cheers.
overwhelming.
Well, thank you
Hey,
so much
thanks,
for
Dennis.
coming.
Thank you.
It was great. Thanks.
Hope to see you at the next First Friday in January. So
Yes, indeed.
thanks very much.
Well, also the holiday party later in the month.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. Yeah, so we're all definitely invited to the Graham School holiday party at the Gleacher Center and on December 14th. So if you're in Chicago and you can make it, we'd be happy to see you there. So
See you there.
thanks very much.
Bye.
All right, take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks.